International economics begins with physical labor. When a nation exports raw goods, like farmers harvesting sugarcane in Fiji, they are shipping tangible value across the globe. When those physical goods leave a country's borders, something else must flow back in to settle the balance: foreign currency. If Fiji exports sugar to the UK and buys machine tools in return, there's a mismatch. Fijian workers need Fijian dollars, but British buyers hold pound sterling. To bridge that gap, those British pounds must be swapped for Fijian dollars. This constant swapping of national currencies happens in the foreign exchange, or forex market. It's a decentralized global network where millions of buyers and sellers trade the money of one nation for the money of another. Every time a physical good crosses a border, a parallel transaction occurs in this currency market. In this system, money itself is the commodity being bought and sold. As a traded commodity, money has a price. The exchange rate is simply the mathematical price of one domestic currency expressed in terms of another. And like the price of oil or wheat, this exact ratio fluctuates constantly based on the aggregate actions of international buyers and sellers. When a government allows these market forces of supply and demand to solely determine the value of its money, it is operating under a floating exchange rate regime. But a government can also choose a different path. Under a fixed exchange rate regime, the central bank intervenes to artificially lock that price at a specific level, regardless of market conditions. A nation's central economic choice comes down to this: allow market gravity to dictate the value of its money, or override those forces through state intervention. To understand how market gravity actually sets these prices, we can map the currency market on a chart. This graph measures the exchange rate on the vertical y-axis against the quantity of domestic currency on the horizontal x-axis. The demand curve slopes downward. This demand is generated by foreigners who need to acquire the domestic currency to buy exports, invest capital, or speculate. The supply curve slopes upward. This represents domestic citizens who supply their local currency to the market, selling it to obtain foreign cash for imported goods or outward investments. Where these two lines intersect is the equilibrium exchange rate. It is the exact price point where the supply of money perfectly matches the demand. In what economists call a clean float, this equilibrium price is completely free to slide up or down the graph as global conditions shift. Without government interference, the exchange rate acts as a pure, unfiltered reflection of a country's real-time international trade and investment flows. Consider a sudden spike in foreign demand for a country's exports, or a massive influx of foreign direct investment. This chart shows how that shock registers. The demand curve shifts outward, driving the equilibrium price of the currency higher. This specific upward movement is called appreciation. Now observe the opposite scenario. Domestic citizens suddenly decide to buy more foreign imports, sending capital out of the country. They flood the foreign exchange market with their local currency to make those purchases. As this chart shows, the supply curve shifts outward, pushing the equilibrium exchange rate down to a lower level. This is depreciation. This lower price triggers a mechanical feedback loop. The depreciated currency makes domestic exports significantly cheaper to foreign buyers, while simultaneously making foreign imports far more expensive at home. Floating regimes operate as automatic economic shock absorbers. Over time, these natural price fluctuations self-correct the nation's balance of payments without requiring any government action. That automatic adjustment is efficient, but it can also be highly volatile. When a government decides this natural market volatility is too damaging for its domestic economy, it will implement a fixed exchange rate. This chart illustrates what happens when a government mandates a rigid official exchange rate above the natural market equilibrium. At this artificially high price, the supply of domestic currency flooding the market far exceeds the actual demand for it. Left alone, the price would naturally fall. To maintain the peg, the central bank must step in and use its own international reserves to continuously buy up that excess domestic currency. Alternatively, this graph shows a fixed rate set below equilibrium. This artificially caps the price, resulting in massive excess demand for the currency. Here, the central bank must constantly print and supply its currency to satisfy that demand, preventing the price from rising to its natural state. It requires constant, active, and expensive financial intervention by the state to fight natural market gravity. This distinction between market forces and state intervention clarifies a common point of confusion in economic terminology. Depreciation is not the same mechanical concept as devaluation. Appreciation and depreciation refers strictly to organic, market-driven shifts in supply and demand within a floating system. As this visual comparison shows, a revaluation or devaluation operates entirely differently. It is a deliberate, policy-driven change to the official peg line itself, executed by a central authority operating within a fixed system. A government might intentionally devalue its currency, lowering its official peg for strategic reasons. By artificially lowering the price of the nation's money, a devaluation acts as a massive stimulus for exports. It makes domestic goods hyper-competitive internationally almost overnight, often driving rapid capital inflow and boosting local production. Fixed regimes turn the exchange rate into an aggressive economic weapon, allowing governments to manually sharpen their global competitiveness through policy alone. Every currency system requires a compromise. A floating regime automatically balances international payments and shields the central bank from draining its reserves. However, that constant volatility creates severe uncertainty for international businesses, and a rapidly depreciating currency can quickly import inflation into the domestic economy. A fixed regime solves that volatility. It provides extreme pricing stability, removing exchange rate risk and making long-term economic planning highly predictable for foreign investors. Yet this stability comes at a steep cost. It locks the balance of payments in a state of disequilibrium, forcing the central bank into a perpetual battle to hoard and spend international reserves. No exchange rate system operates without friction. Every nation must ultimately decide whether they prefer the chaotic truth of a free-floating market or the expensive illusion of a fixed peg.